Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're going to have an exciting talk led by Dr. Hui Shao. Hui is an associate professor in the Hubert Department of Global Health and the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine. A former Prevention Effectiveness Fellow at the CDC, Hui works at the intersection of pharmacoepidemiology, microsimulation modeling, and machine learning, with the goal of advancing precision medicine in diabetes and multimorbidity. So his work as a project PI is funded by NIDDK and the CDC. And for all the graduate students who are listening, beyond his impressive research credentials, Hui is also an enthusiastic and creative mentor to his doctoral students and postdocs. So Hui.
Thank you so much for this kind of introduction. So you wrote it yourself. All right. So hello, everyone. I'm your friendly neighbor, Hui, and it's really an honor to be here today. So just 15 minutes ago, while I was standing here going through my slides, I realized I did not prepare my opening jokes. But I really need one because it's a lunchtime, right? I need to get everybody refreshed so that you can start to pay attention to this talk. So I opened my browser, logged into my ChatGPT, and asked ChatGPT, please give me an opening joke. Has anybody tried this trick before? No? Okay. No, don't do that for me. So I realized that the generative AI has a very terrible sense of humor. So the jokes they tell, I can never get it. They actually the ChatGPT offered me 5 options. None of those I find it funny can be used for today, or not even close. So then I just learned what the AI cannot do. So let's talk about what the AI can actually contribute today. Okay, let me move this aside. So is there a way I can move this? Okay. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. All right, okay. So today I'll be talking about using machine learning to support precision medicine and precision public health, and from an equity standpoint. Before we really dive into the issue here, let's talk about diabetes, because I know only half of you guys know diabetes and some of you not really familiar with this disease. So basically, diabetes is a very complex disease. So when we talk about diabetes, the first thing that comes into our mind are high blood sugar, right? So this name is kind of tied to the term diabetes or diabetes mellitus. So then people with high blood sugar have diabetes. So the intuitive way is to reduce their blood sugar. So that is very, that's not rocket science. But even for this, the very basic of controlling diabetes, people have debating this for decades, right? So even at now, we still don't have a clear understanding about how we should control the blood glucose and how low we should control it. So these 5 trials are the longest trial in human history, traced back to the 1960s, when people are trying to answer how low is low. So we talk about reducing blood glucose, but should we reduce it to a normal glycemic level, or we should reduce it to a semi-normal type of level? So even for this very simple concept, different trials give very mixed results. And at today, we still don't know what is the best goal. And that is just for the glucose goal, right? So even we know how low is low and what is the aim, how low we want to control our blood glucose, how to get there is another big question. Now we have 12 classes of diabetes drugs and so many options and so many combinations. And here I show is what we call a roadmap of medication choices published by American Diabetes Association. Basically tells you when to use what drug and at what sequence. So it's very complex. So let me make it even more complex. Is that for different drugs, the treatment effect varied individual by individual. So this figure I show is just, I randomly pick one of the RCT for a random drug in the diabetes field. So in this drug's trial, overall, the drug is effective. But when you look at the subgroups, people only with high BMI benefit from the drug. People only with the long diabetes duration benefit from the drug. And people only with high baseline blood glucose benefit from the drug. So in other words, even we write the same guideline for diabetes people, different people will respond to this guideline or to this particular medication very differently based on where they stand. let me make it even more complex. So the guideline now say, on top of all the clinical concerns you have, you also need to take into account patient preferences, right? Whether you want to do it as a injectable, oral medications, do you want to do it every day, once per week, once per month? And also, you also need to check with the patient preference about the benefit versus the risk, adverse events, particularly like hypoglycemia and stuff like that. So patient preference is also the case here. Let me make it even more complex. So that is the cost of diabetes treatment. So each line denotes one class of the drugs, and the y-axis is the cost, the payment for annual supply of this drug, and the x-axis is the time. So basically, if you look at the cost distribution across diabetes drug, you have those very expensive drugs, and you also have very affordable drugs. Different drugs have different risk profile, but also have different level of benefits. So the economic story behind all those drugs are even more, sometimes even more fascinating than the medical story behind it. So now, so many factors to concern and so many options. So it's really a hot mess when we're talking about managing diabetes, both from a clinical perspective, but also from a plan level or policy level. So that's why the idea of whether we can use advanced analytical approach to get some sense about what's going on and trying to get everything sort of in place to come up with a good story to inform clinical practice or inform the policy making. So this is what I see where this AI could help, can potentially be helpful. And in terms of precision medicine, we can use AI to answer these kind of questions like, can we leverage machine learning and artificial intelligence to improve the risk prediction of the diabetes complications? So can we use machine learning to explore the variation of treatment effect across patient subgroups with different characteristics? So can we say through machine learning optimize the clinical outcome by individualizing their therapeutic strategies? And can we kind of personalized medicine can lead to better health outcomes? Those are related to the precision medicine. And if we take a step further and talk about precision policy, so can individualized therapeutic strategy lead to cost saving? Can we design a precision policy plan that overcome cost barriers in people's population subgroups so that we can optimize the treatment benefit? And can precision public health bridge the gap in terms of the health disparity? So all those questions can be answered by the artificial intelligence and the machine learning. So today's topic, I will talk about this field, but in particular, I want to talk about the health equity. So these are the funding I received from the NIH and CDC in support of this these line of work. So since I promised to talk about health equity in this particular talk, let's talk about health equity. So one of the biggest health equity issue in diabetes is about diabetes medications, because there is a fascinating story at both clinical side and the medical side. So in the last decade or 2 decades, we have witnessed a lot of excitement in terms of the new technology and the new inventions. 2 medication drug class in particular, SGLT2 inhibitor and GLP-1 receptor agonists. So those 2 drugs I named at the bottom left. You can now see my mouth. Oh, okay, it's here. So many products fall within these 2 drug class has been developed and put into the market. And growing randomized clinical trials show that both of the drugs have substantial clinical benefit. Some of the drugs have a strong A1 blood glucose and weight loss effect, and some of the drugs can even protect heart failure, which none of the previous drug is capable of achieving. So in light of those randomized clinical trials, even the most authority, the American Diabetes Association, revised these guidelines, start to strongly recommend the use of these 2 drug classes in clinical practice. From the year 2019, after all those large trials was finished and the results was released. And this graph shows the market share change over time. So the y-axis shows the proportion of people who who were using each of the drug classes, and the x-axis is the time. So the purple are the most widely used, superlureus, not purple, the pink area. So the pink area is still strong, but you can see the rest of the area, the greenish area, the yellow area, they all rapidly shrinking. So those are the old medications. And the new medications, the purple one and the pink purplish color, the two the two on the bottom are the SGLT2 and GLP-1. And as you can see, since 2010, so those drugs start to take over the market. So because of the release of the trial result, but also the recommendation of the professional guidelines. However, because of the guideline and the use and the evidence that really gives the drugs a room for the demand, right? So more demand means they have room to increase their price. So this is another paper published on diabetes care. So basically what we found is that for those older drugs, those on the top, their price shrank substantially over the years. But for the newer drug, like the GLP-1 and the SGLT2, the two on the bottom, under the bottom, actually their price almost doubled since they entered the market in recent years. So the high cost create a huge barrier in terms of who can afford it. So according to the current literature, only 9% of the people were actually using SGLT2, and even less people were using GLP-1 receptor. So those most effective drugs in managing diabetes, only this proportion of people are actually using this drug, and only less than 7% of people are considered using the best medications they should be using at the current practice. And in one of the other paper my team published, we run a very interesting small study. We run a regression. The outcome is whether this person is using this newer medication or not. And the right-hand variable include a lot of social demographic characteristic, income characteristic, but also clinical characteristic, A1C, lab results, etc. And we run a decomposition analysis to see how much of the variation in the outcome can be explained by the variation of those predictors. And what we found is that those clinical factors that really determines the need of those newer medications only explained less than 16% of the variation of these drug use. But social economic status, income, those kind of things actually explained 50% of the drug use. So in other words, whether you need this drug plays less of a role in terms of whether you receive the drug. Whether you can afford this drug plays a more important role in receiving the drug. So that's the story. And in another paper we published on the Annals of Internal Medicine, we evaluated this drug use, and we found that 80% of the diabetes population actually meet the recommended criteria and should be using this drug according to the ADA's guideline. But only 1 out of 10 people were actually using it. And another interesting paradox is that we found that for people who meet this recommendation guideline and should be using the drug, only 9% were using it. But for people not meeting the criteria, and they are not recommended of using this drug because they have a very low risk of developing complications, 11% were using it. So clearly there is a paradox here, and people who are actually using it, not actually receiving it. So although the newer drug has many barriers, but the major barrier is its affordability, because the cost for annual supply is almost 15,000 per year. And the part the patient have to pay is more than 1,500 every year. So you can imagine not everybody can afford this level of payment just to managing their chronic conditions. So that is something that creates the barrier and lead to today's drug utilization pattern. And because these drugs are very expensive, and can you imagine if your health plan are committed to pay for a drug that costs you $15,000 for the 80% of the diabetes population, that's not possible, right? So no plan can afford it, even the Medicare. And now these weight loss drugs start to be approved for controlling body weight among the non-diabetes population. So actually, the people who meet this indication is even wider nowadays because of the new evidence showing the glucose, those diabetes drug actually works perfectly in managing body population. So in other words, basically more than half of the people in the room will be eligible for those newer medication, whether you have diabetes or not. So that's why major insurance don't decide not to cover this. Even Medicare saying, okay, we know this drug is good, but we're just not going to cover it because nobody can afford this. But not covering it is definitely not a good thing, especially when we're thinking about how effective this drug could be and what is the health benefit this drug can bring to people. So what could be the possible solutions here? And as an insurance plan, instead of saying we're just not going to cover it, so who should be covered as a good approach when you design the formulary of a medication? Let's go back to these slides. So we know that for each drug, for all the drugs, if you look at their report from their initial randomized trial, you always see variations of drug effects. There's always subgroup of people that benefit more as compared to its counterparts. So this applies to all the trials and all the medications. So following that thought, can we identify patient subgroups that can receive the highest treatment benefit compared to its counterpart in this population? So what if we can identify those subgroups? And what if we can say, let's start rolling our health plan coverage firstly among those subgroups? Is this a good deal? So do you think the plan will like this? So if we talk about the cost effectiveness ratio and talk about the cost effectiveness evidence, because the health plan rely on these to make formularies, they might think that if we can demonstrate that people with the high benefit user have a much higher economic return, or in other words, lower ICER, health economics, cost effectiveness analysis. So if you can demonstrate that while using this drug among the overall population is not cost effective, but if using this drug in high benefit user is super cost effective, there could be also evidence to persuade the policymaker, Medicare, Medicaid, or the private insurance population to first thinking about rolling their coverage among the high benefit users. So that is the idea of precisely target high benefit user and design formulary that reflect who can benefit substantially from the treatment. So what could be the impact here on health equity, since I promised to talk about health equity today? So it is a very common issue every time a very effective drug released to the market. And it's no-brainer to understand that this drug must be very expensive, right? So it's how the market works. Every time a new drug into the market with a high effective and with a high price and cost sharing, it pretty much almost always creates health disparities because people can afford the high cost sharing, high copay, can be able to access it at the beginning. So numerous prior studies supports the use of policy level interventions to improve the treatment access. First, in the targeted clinical high benefit users. So basically, when the insurance finds difficult to cover everybody, they will put restrictions on their formulary saying, let's cover a bunch of people which require your clinician to write up us a note and got this pre-approval. And if we give you pre-approval, then your clinician can say, okay, your insurance agreed to cover your medication. This is where the patient can use it. So this strategy has been used extensively. So these interventions generally aim to improve the affordability. But in reality, it often have a very good spillover effect in terms of improving health equity, because people who in a less ideal social economic status, people who have low income or living insecure environment, those people, they have a larger gap in healthcare. And a policy that remove access barriers just based on the clinical needs can most likely to benefit people who have a larger gap. In other words, people who from less ideal social and economic conditions. So we're aiming for this spillover effect. So we're not talk about direct give subsidies. Instead, we're talk about if a plan that targets high benefit users and promote drug use in high benefit users, can this plan also have a nice strong spillover effect to improve health equity? So that is the idea of why the precision medicine is very important, because we believe it can help with the health equity by not talking about health equity as initially as the plan designing phase. So using these two medications as an example, because we already showed that the income level tied to the drug use, not the medical needs, right? So if we found people who need the medication and give access to these newer medications, it's a no-brainer that more people who cannot afford it can actually benefit from such a policy as compared to people who actually already can afford it. In that way, it's likely that the health benefit can be improved. So that will be the hypothesis of the studies, which we will require us to answer through empirical evidence. Okay, so it's not going to be resolved. So all those hypotheses, all those things we want to achieve is not going to be resolved within one study or one project, right? So it's a very large area of research, need hundreds of papers to support and validate. So my team pinpoint 4 areas that all needs to be advanced in order to achieve this precision medicine goal eventually. So the top 2 areas are the advancement in methodology, and the bottom area are the advancement of the applied field. So the top two area are developing micro-simulation model for disease progression and use machine learning to study heterogeneous treatment responses. And the bottom 2 are the methods used in precision medicine and precision public health. And in the following slides, I will introduce each of the areas one by one to give you a holistic picture about how can we use research to support the precision public health eventually. First, let's talk about the AI-based algorithm to study heterogeneous treatment effect. So basically, what we want to come out is everybody in this analysis, but when the trials data was released, we are able to launch some machine learning algorithm on this trials data and revisit this trials data in order to pick those subgroups. Those subgroups are initially defined in the clinical, research proposal. So in other words, those are the predefined subgroups that everybody will look at. We're not interested in those subgroups. We're interested in generating more knowledge about if there are subgroups that is actually modulates the treatment effect that never been thought of by the researchers. So this is the place where the machine learning comes in, because machine learning does not require you to predefine any of the subgroup of the treatment effect. What they do is that they search over all the data domains in that database and trying to make sense of the data and pinpoint patient subgroups that can actually have a huge variation in terms of the treatment benefit. So there are already existing algorithms here for us to use. I group them into 2 classes. The first is called causal AI algorithm. So I named here, you can Google yourself if you really want to learn it. So some called causal forest, causal tree, causal survival forest. So those are the terms you want to search for. So these algorithms allow you to recursively cut your data into different subgroups and run traditional comparative pattern analysis within that subgroup to get the treatment effect. And then you can compare this treatment effect across different segmentation of the data to see which subgroup have the highest treatment effect. So that's how this algorithm works. And if you don't want to learn how to do the causal forest, there's also easier way to do it, which only need you to learn the basic predictive AI. So basically what people do is to first match people from the intervention group to the control group and do the predictive AI algorithm, like random forest, gradient boosting, which can help us to do the same approach. So eventually, the idea of this line work is to come up with a graph like this. So basically, to deep dive into the model, into the data and the model, to know what are the important treatment benefit modulators. So in this group, as you can see, we identified a lot of variables retinopathy history, existing CVD disease, right? So each of them play a part in terms of determining the treatment benefit of this canagliflozin treatment. So we found that if a person have retinopathy history, it's a strong indication that this guy could be a high treatment benefit users of this drug, canagliflozin. And same goes to other indications. So eventually, we use this detailed information. We can come up with some scoring system or just some subgroups to say, hey, if you meet this, and this criteria, you are considered high benefit user because your benefit from this drug is substantially higher as compared to normal population. So this is what these kind of this line of work can do, and this is an essential piece of work before we can move to that precision policy era. Okay, so that's the one research area. So another research area is to build a micro simulation model. So why do we need a micro simulation model? That is because most of the trial is very short term, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years at most, right? You rarely see 5-year trial, especially in diabetes field. So, but when we're talking about diabetes, we always use lifetime benefit as a measurement window because it's the chronic disease, even 3-year benefit that does not necessarily mean that long-termly is beneficial or economical. So how to convert short-term benefit into a long-term value assessment? So the micro simulation model is the most cutting edge and a thing to do. So what is a micro simulation model? So basically, micro simulation model is just a mathematical calculation algorithm. The aim of this model is to take what this person's currently is, like his current age, current demographic, current lab values, and current disease history. So taking information from the current stage and project what will happen to this person over a lifetime. So that is what simulation is about. It's to model the natural progression of the disease. And microsimulation model often derived from extremely large cohort. And we use machine learning and all kinds of stuff to dive the data and develop such an algorithm. So this is a schematic map for one of the model I developed called the Bravo diabetes simulation model. So in this model, we treat each organ as an agent in that model. We model the decay with people aging of organs such as brain, microvascular system, heart, kidney, eye, pancreatic, and microvascular system. So we have functions to model the decay of different organs over time and the risk of complications attached to each organ and will increase as this patient aging. So that's how this model works. So for brain, we have stroke and Alzheimer's disease. For macrovascular system, we have a lot of myocardial infarction, heart failure, and etc. So as the heart conditions decays, the risk of those complications will start to increase as people age. So that is how this micro simulation model is built. So in the year 2018, our model participated in this multiple competition where a Cambridge group invited all the modelers from the world together to Düsseldorf, Düsseldorf, Germany, to do this competition. So we were given two trials and to predict the trial's endpoint and to see which one can predict better. So that is the idea of competition. So our model won the first place in this game. So at least in the year 2018, it was the best model in the world. And for this model itself, we have 15 papers. So 5 master's papers validating the model and 10 papers we're actually using this model to resolve the real world issue. I'll be talking about this in the following sections. So as this knowledge progresses, so more and more micro simulation model in this field start to include more disease, right? So a wider inclusion of complications because they think in the field of chronic disease, the chronic condition can kind of tie to anything people known to people, and they want to start to include more outcomes. And we also have a lot of different outcomes model along the pipeline. A lot of them with CDC, a lot of them also sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. So why these two method area is relevant in terms of the precision medicine and precision public health, because the disease simulation model benchmark your health outcomes in the future. So think about this. If a model, given your current status, can predict what's going to happen to you in 10 years, 20 years, and lifetime. And then through this line of research that study the heterogeneous treatment response, you can think about this as a treatment module, and you plug in different treatment in the simulation pathway to see the health outcome associated with the use of different medications. Then you're able to compare the outcome associated with different medication strategies and pick out the best one, whether it is a policy or a clinical question. It can all be resolved under this framework. So that's why I'm talking about these two methods. So then we can talk about the actual work, like how these kind of research can be applied in the field of precision medicine, precision public health. So let's talk about the precision medicine first, because we have to first understand the high benefit user and then move on to the precision public health area. So precision medicine is the requirement for this. So talk about the causal AI method. The first study we did that utilized the causal AI method is to understand who are the high benefit user of GLP-1. So we revisit a trial called Harmony trial, which is aimed to assess the clinical efficacy of this drug called abiglutide, which is the GLP-1 drug. And what we found is that the most significant effect modulator is missed from the research protocol is the alkaline phosphatase level, which measures the liver function. So basically, the liver function determines a person's reaction to the GLP-1 receptor agonist. If a person have, let's say, NASH or a non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or some cirrhosis, so they have liver damage or liver conditions, not in a good status. Even you give this person a GLP-1 receptor agonist, the benefit will not be much or none at all. So that is what we found through the machine learning algorithm. That really generates some novel knowledge that inform the clinical practice. Another study, we applied the causal AI methods to a randomized clinical trial called ACCORD. So the ACCORD trial is testing a treatment strategy, not a drug, but a treatment strategy to reduce, it's called intensive glycemic control, that reduce a body's blood glucose level aiming at a normal glycemic level. So what we found is that when we're talking about intensive glycemic control, there is a synergistic association between a person's baseline blood pressure level. So if a person have a very low baseline systolic blood pressure, less than 69 millimeter histogram, this person will have an elevated risk of heart failure if you put him on intensive glycemic control. See, the relative ratio here is 1.66 at the bottom. Sorry, I cannot see my mouse here. But basically, it creates a huge red flag. So if you are a clinician, when you're trying to put your patient on intensive glycemic control strategy, you have to look at his systolic blood pressure. If this person's systolic blood pressure is too low, then you put him at risk if you choose this intervention strategy. And the third causal AI method we did is to see who can benefit from the intensive glycemic control strategy using the same approach. And what we found is that if a person already have a very high elevated blood glucose, A1C above, let's say 9%, for this person, you cannot put him in an intensive glycemic control because a sharp reduction of the blood glucose level can actually put him on a lot of side effects. But if this person's A1C level is less than 8.5%, which is not ideal, but not too bad. So for this type of person, putting him on the intensive glycemic control can actually lead to a lot of favorable clinical outcomes. So that's another causal AI method. So we further run a lot of pharmacogenetic research targeting one of the most important peptide, the GLP-1 receptor, because this is the peptide, the newer drug, GLP-1 receptor agonist, is targeted to agonist. So we tested 15 genetic SNPs that associated with the GLP-1 receptors expression. And what we found is that only people that carry certain genotype benefit from the GLP-1 receptor agonist in terms of cardio benefit and renal benefit. So if you carry this certain genotype, your benefit can be substantial, like 50% risk reduction of heart disease, 30% risk reduction from the acute renal injury. But if you do not carry those genotypes, this is very unfortunate, but you will not benefit from the medication. Even your clinician put you on this medication, on this treatment. If your clinician give you the medication, then you spend $15,000 for this medication. No benefit is gonna incur. And in another study, we deep dive about whether these genetic variations is associated with the goal setting. And what we found is that people carry certain genotypes are more suitable for the intensive glycemic control as compared to the moderate glycemic control. So it's really your genes that determines whether you can benefit from this intensive strategies. And in another study, we use the simulation model to take half-year short-term trials results and project it into the 5-year outcome. So this is also another cool study that we want to help the ADA to understand, because at that time when this study was conducted, only half-year results was available for the most trending drug, tirzepatide, which has currently become the best drug in the market. But when the short-term outcome released, everybody decided. So we were charged to run a simulation to see this 5-year outcome, because the short-term outcome does not interpretable or relatable to the clinicians. So we populate the short-term trial to the results to the 5-year outcome to really see the benefit of the medications. And this is another classic user case for the precision medicine. So basically, we create this heat map for the clinical use. So in each cell represents how many years you left. So it's a life expectancy. So for example, if you are talking about a female patient walking to a clinic with an age between 50 and 60, with BMI 30, blood pressure 160, and lipids 100 unit. So his life expectancy is 22.8 years. So that is his life expectancy. So the reason why we want to do this, because we want the clinician bridge this communication between the clinician and the patient by letting the clinician to show the importance of receiving the medication.
Hello,
so for this patient, he's clearly not got his blood glucose well controlled. But if a clinician explains to the patient about the value of blood glucose control, sometimes it may not be that relatable when people start to talk about cardiovascular risk and those kind of fancy terms, right? But if you tell the patients that if you take those medications and next time you see me, if your blood glucose reduced from 10% to 7%, that's 5 more years down the road to live with your family and friends. So that will be a strong indication and a nudge for the patients to adhere to the treatment. And this is where this heat map is about. We want to create these things for the clinician to use. And through this heat map, we can even say, now you got your A1C under control. Let's take care of your body weight as the next treatment goal. If you reduce your body weight from 30 BMI to 25, there's 1.2 years more to live down the road, which you can spend. And this heat map can also help the clinician to prioritize competing goals. So if a clinician walks into the clinic, need his blood pressure and the blood glucose to be controlled at the same time, which goal should be achieved first? Because you cannot achieve them both. It will be too much burden on the patient in the beginning. So this roadmap shows a clear decision about which goal should be aiming first by just simply calculating which goal can give you additional life years to live. And combining all those evidence, we also developed a purely AI app that every time a patient comes into the clinic, the AI got all the information from this person's electronic health records, and then run all the existing medication strategies and give this person the medication recommendations. So this AI is what we call the Bravo Go, which is the successor of the Bravo simulation model. So we leverage all the things we discussed previously and came up with this prototype. So basically, the table you see on the left are the information we extracted from the EHR. And we use a simulation model to give the medication recommendation, which is the lower right corner. So for this person, if you are aiming to maximize your all-cause mortality, the best medication you should be receiving is canagliflozin, followed by dapagliflozin, et cetera, et cetera. And with different goals, when you, instead of talking about mortality, you want to prevent your cardiovascular disease, or if you want to maximize your health utility, life quality, maybe there's different choices for you. So basically, this is the AI that can automatically give you treatment recommendations. This is one of the studies funded by NIH that actually implement the things I was just talking about. And we use an app called Smart on Fire, which can help us directly extract information from the EHR and put them into a common data model that the Bravo model can read. And then the data flow into the model and simulate the results and flow back and push back to the EHR, where the clinician can directly see the results in the Epic system.
Recording in
and we're running a dry lab where in the clinic, every time a patient walks into the clinic, the AI will give a prescription while the clinician will give a prescription. And then the prescribed results will be masked to the reviewers. And in the end of the day, a judge will look at both of the recommendation records and determine which prescriber makes more sense or give a better prescription recommendations. And the judge will say whether the prescriber A is better or B, but without knowing which one is the AI and which one is the actual clinician. And the judge will, and then we will review the results to see whether the AI gave a better prescription or the clinician gave a better prescription from a blinded clinician's perspective. So the initial results suggest that the AI intends to prescribe more aggressively as compared to the clinician, which may often appreciate a conservative medication strategy. Okay, that's too much about the precision medicine. Let's talk about the precision public health policy. So a few of my models were used by the Institution for Clinical and Economic Review, which is ICER. So it's a funny name, but it's pretty neat. So this organization is based in Boston. The idea is that all the other countries use pharmacoeconomic research to support the pricing, but in the United States, we don't do that. So to fill this gap, the ICER was formed to provide the price recommendations and plan recommendations to healthcare policymakers to how to design the medications. And a few of our study utilizing this medication. The first is that big study we had is to evaluate a policy called Medicare Senior Saving Model. It was 3 years ago when insulin high price was all over the internet, right? So for insulin, which has 100 years old age, the annual supply of insulin costs more than $10,000 for a person. So which makes a lot of people who actually needed the insulin cannot afford the insulin. So under that environment, the White House and Medicare come to an agreement that they want to launch this senior saving model that reduce the copay cap of insulin per month down to $35. So under this policy, we did an economic evaluation to really understand what this policy impact to the society. So two key messages. One, the policy will lead to favorable health outcome. So that is the term I use because it's no brainer for a policy that promotes the use of insulin. Obviously, it can improve the health outcome for sure, right? But another key message is that A, it's not going to be cost effective and sustainable, and B, it will actually increase health equity. So why is that? It's because you can imagine who will benefit the most from a policy like this, right? So imagine your bill was $150, now it's $35 a month. So who will benefit the most? So the people who benefit the most are actually people who already can afford the insulin from the beginning because they are on insulin full time. previously they pay 150, now they pay $35, right? So people cannot afford 150, may not be able to afford $35 as well. But those people, without research, you actually have no idea whether the policy can benefit from those people. But one thing we for sure is that people who can afford it can actually afford it. So in another study, we did a range of simulation experiment, and what we found is that unless the insulin's price reduced by 70% or 30% of its original, unless they do this, this policy will be died out very soon because it's not sustainable. So 70% price reduction is the key. And following our publication, actually, Eli Lilly took the first stand to reduce their price by 70% 3 months after the paper was released. So now many other drug companies also reduce their insulin prices by 70%, which is quite impressive. So let's talk about other study. Right. So we have 2 ongoing projects looking at how to design a precision plan for SGLT2 inhibitor and GLP-1 receptor agonist. We first trying to understand who are the high benefit users, and then trying to understand if we launch a program like $0 copay program, which you give free access to those newer medication in certain population, what's its outcome in terms of clinical, economic, and equity outcome. And what we found that in terms of high benefit user, people's baseline CVD risk and the people's baseline EGFR level, which measures the renal condition, actually the most significant factor that determines the benefit of the medications. And according to our analysis, only people who have a baseline CVD, 10-year CVD risk about 15%, or have an EGFR less than 90%, only this group of people, when these using SGLT2 inhibitors, their economic output is considered cost-effective or economically favorable. And we came up with this scoring system on top of the figure. So it's a scoring matrix. So basically, they only have 4 variables, clinical relevant variables. And these clinical relevant variables all tied to a specific score. And when you summarize variables from all of the value of these variables together, they become a total score, and you can benchmark this total score on the scale to see if your health plan is paying for this person, whether this drug use is cost effective or not. So this scale was designed for the insurance company to use. So hopefully, so we have a project with the Louisiana Blue Cross Blue Shield on $0 copay program. So we were hoping that we can do something like this instead to polish up the existing program. And this is the what we call distributional cost effectiveness analysis, where we found that if you give this free access to everybody in the diabetes population, it will not impact the racial disparity, but will reduce the income disparity. So that is a work in progress. So we haven't done a lot of analysis yet. So in conclusion, we really believe that AI-enhanced analytical methods can provide a unique opportunity to generate more insightful knowledge in both precision medicine and precision public health. And we really working, my team and other team were working together to understand how to design this precision policy, and this precision policy gather more information about whether this precision policy can help improve the health equity and future application. So this is really a new area with so many possibilities, and this is actually a large area which have so many small directions researchers can pursue. But it also have many challenges as the same level of challenge, if not more, as traditional analytical approach. And when we're talking about the AI-driven method, we should always be aware that it's the people's life we're talking about on the end of the method. So for me personally, I don't like black box machine learning algorithm. I don't work with black box machine learning algorithm. I think all the machine learning algorithm in this area must be interpretable and can have a good pathophysiological foundations to work with. And after we figure that out, in terms of precision medicine, then we can enter the precision public health era and put everything together that can really help with the population health. Okay, that's so much. That's pretty much everything I would like to say. So I can take questions. Thank you. Yeah, of course.
You had one study that I'm just curious.
So the question is, that's a simulation study. So for simulation study, they're trying to make an inference for a national sample, what a national sample could be. So in the older days, the National Nutritional Survey is an ideal place for us to generate a simulation sample that is nationally representative. So that survey use a stratified random survey methods to collect a national representative sample. But there's also downside for that survey sample. So the good part is that it has a wide inclusion of information. So most of the survey don't ask the patient to go to the nearest lab to get his blood glucose measured, his lipid measured, but this survey does require the participant to measure his biometrics, which makes this survey unique. But also because this uniqueness is expensive, so the sample size is always an issue for us. So in terms of generating national representative sample, now we're experimental other options. So one of the options is the EPIC Cosmos data, which we will consider become an alternative to the NHANES down the road. So that is the question. That is the. Yeah.
It looks like Francisco has his hand raised.
Okay. All right. So. Okay, I can unmute. I don't know how to do that. Oh yeah. Francisco, you're on mute.
Hey, can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, the audio in the room is
perfect. Sorry, I think I'm connected to the device.
So it's okay. We can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So, hey, fantastic talk. It's really amazing the work that you're doing. I had a question about. It's fascinating that you can come out with some new potential markers or predictors of the heterogeneity in the response to therapy. You had these two examples, one with albiglutide, and you found that those with an alk phos more than 70 or less than 70 could be discriminated in those who will benefit or not, and there could be some potential possibility in the risk of gallbladder disease that you can have with GLP-1s, and so that was what was interesting. And the second one was the one from the Accord trial with people with lower diastolic blood pressure and the risk of heart failure, I believe. So yes. I think those examples are really interesting, and there may be some sort of potential plausibility. But the question I have here is, have you been able to reproduce this in other data sets to say, like, this seems real and we need to do something about this, and this is the way to go?
So I think this is the excellent point, Francisco. I think we are able to replicate it, especially, let's say, all of us data, right? All the EPIC Cosmos. So the only caveat is that the initial data we developed this pattern is from the Accord, which is the randomized controlled trial. So in this population, the treatment goal is randomly allocated. And in the real world, is a bit less intuitive, because we need to use a lot of like matching or econometrics methods to adjust for the confounding in order to produce the result. So that creates a layer of challenge for us to really do a high quality validation results from those patterns. That's the only concern. But I'm happy to work with you to look at those in a different population. Right, great. So any questions? You mentioned you have a list of that. Yeah.
There's all this, but I'm not doing AI, so I'm trying trying to make sense of this conversation that's happening about the biases in AI. And I think you might have touched on that when you were referring to black box. So what I was just curious about was if we're going to make improvements in health equity, is that your approach to avoid that bias problem? Is have a model that's kind of consciously made?
I think this is an excellent point. I think fairness in the AI is really important and also trending topic. So the idea of fairness in AI is that when you develop a model which is a black box, you don't know what's going on here. And especially in your population, let's say you have 90% of the people who are white and 10% are black. And the goal of these training models is to maximize its prediction, right? So intuitively, it's going to go for the performance among the majorities. And if you use a model like this without knowing this feature, and when you apply it in the clinics, the results will work much better among the majorities as compared to the minority, which will create a lot of unfairness and biases. And yes, I think that definitely has to be taken into account in all the machine learning related studies.
Do you think there's a way to empirically make that, or if there's if you just don't have underlying experimental data using minority populations that gives you kind of a robust prior, do we have to first change how we do clinical trials to get more minority samples?
I think both. I think you made a very good point about the inclusion of the clinical trials. I think especially nowadays, most of the large trials, but especially the IH funded, put a huge emphasis on recruiting more people from other minority groups. I think most of my AI are using real world data, which is electronic health record. So has a lot of people from different groups. So it's not, so we're talking about millions of people and the records. So in those studies, I often train model and then train model separately across different population subgroups to assess the necessity of separate algorithm as compared to overall algorithm. So that is, so that's the level of thoughtfulness we need to do in order to avoid those fairness issues.
Subgroup analysis still important.
Yeah, still important, and also validations.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm thinking about was the long-term benefit and low-income populations. It can be kind of hard to convince somebody to think about long-term health if they have like no house or food per day. And so I'm wondering, that raises all these questions about social determinants of health. Is there a way that we can think AI might provide us with some sense of a unique contribution to that kind of like elephant in the room that like you can't, most of the people who are most affected are low income and therefore they've got so many issues at the present moment that they can't think about optimizing future health?
I think it's an important question, but also a very difficult question to answer, right? So I don't think the question is about whether AI can do it. I think we just, as a researcher, I think there's a lot of strong interest in this area, so we can work together on this. So whether it is AI methods or traditional methods, I think all have their roles in this line of research. Yeah. Also, I think I see. Okay. So I think I see Amber's comments, but probably not. Yeah, it's delusional.
No.
Actually, I think we answered that question, so I took it off. But it was more about
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you, Amber.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
So my question was about, how there is variation in terms of adverse effects of drugs, right? And that kind of information is really difficult to get from either the medical charts because documentation is poor in terms of like how patients sometimes don't tolerate these medications. So how do you incorporate all of that, as these algorithms make their predictions?
Yeah, I think it's thank you, Amber. I think it's a very interesting, important, and yet difficult to address. I think so. On the documentation, so I think traditional way we do is that in order to understand variation of the adverse event, we first go to data source that have good documentation of these kind of things, and that will be the starting point. So if the variables and the information are not measured in the database, yeah, it's hard to it's challenging to address, I think.
Thank you.